The first time the signal hit Earth, it was barely a blip, a faint anomaly detected by the newest deep space observatories orbiting beyond the Moon. Most dismissed it as background noise, but Dr. Elena Travers, a fiercely determined astrophysicist, didn't. She spent weeks analyzing the data, her curiosity transforming into obsession. It wasn't noise, it was a pattern. What are the odds of this being a coincidence? Her assistant, Ravi, asked, leaning over the holographic display. The pattern repeated, a complex mathematical sequence, pulsing with precision. None, Elena replied, her voice sharp with conviction. This is intentional. Someone or something is out there. Within days, the discovery snowballed. The world's leading space agencies scrambled to verify her findings. Hidden behind the signal was an image, a snapshot of a planet almost identical to Earth. Oceans shimmered like liquid sapphires, continents sprawled in familiar yet alien shapes, and an atmosphere rich with oxygen glowed under a golden sun. A twin Earth, the media buzzed, branding it Terra Omega. But excitement quickly turned to fear. The image contained more than just geography, it showed devastation. Vast swaths of the land were blackened as if scorched by fire, cities lay in ruins, and enormous skeletal remains of unrecognizable creatures littered the terrain. Despite the warnings etched into Terra Omega's surface, humanity couldn't resist the allure. A mission was assembled, a coalition of Earth's finest minds, soldiers and explorers aboard the starship Aegis. Elena was chosen as the scientific lead. The journey would take months, but faster-than-light propulsion made it possible. The moment they arrived, everything felt wrong. From orbit, Terra Omega was breathtaking, a haunting reflection of Earth. But as the Aegis descended, the illusion shattered. Forests appeared unnervingly still, their canopy so dense that sunlight barely pierced through. Rivers snaked unnaturally, their water shimmering with an oily iridescence. Commander Harris, a seasoned leader with a jawline as sharp as his instincts, gathered the crew in the observation deck. Mission protocol is clear. We explore, collect data, and get out. We don't engage unless absolutely necessary. The crew nodded, but unease rippled through them. The planet's silence was deafening, as though the very air resisted their presence. Elena led the first away team, a mix of scientists and soldiers. Their destination was an apparent city ruin spotted from orbit. As their shuttle skimmed over a sprawling plain, she caught sight of movement, a blur in the corner of her eye. "Did anyone see that?" she asked, her heart pounding. "Probably wildlife," Ravi muttered, though his voice trembled. The ruins were colossal, their architecture eerily reminiscent of Earth's ancient civilizations. Towers, cracked and leaning, reached toward the sky, their surfaces covered in strange glyphs that pulsed faintly. Elena's gloved hand brushed over one of the glyphs, and it glowed brighter. "Don't touch anything," Harris barked, but it was too late. A deep rumble vibrated through the ground. The team froze as the shadows shifted unnaturally, pooling together like liquid mercury. From the darkness emerged shapes, humanoid but grotesquely twisted. "Defensive positions!" Harris roared. The creatures charged, their movements jerky but horrifyingly fast. Their bodies seemed to be a patchwork of flesh, bone, and metal, as though nature and technology had waged war within them. The soldiers opened fire, bullets tearing into the creatures, but they barely slowed. "Fall back to the shuttle!" Harris shouted. Elena's heart thundered as she ran, Ravi close behind her. One of the creatures lunged, its jagged claws slicing through the air. A soldier shoved Elena aside, taking the brunt of the attack. Blood sprayed as the creature ripped him apart. They reached the shuttle just as another wave of creatures emerged from the ruins. Harris slammed his hand on the controls, and the shuttle's engines roared to life. As they lifted off, Elena looked back, her stomach churning. The ruins glowed, the glyphs spreading like veins across the landscape. The creatures stood motionless, their hollow eyes following the shuttle as it soared into the sky. Back on the Aegis, panic erupted. The footage from the shuttle was replayed repeatedly, each viewing raising more questions than answers. "What the hell are those things?" demanded Dr. Malik, a biologist. "Evolution gone mad," Elena said, her voice hollow. "It's like nature took a wrong turn and never stopped." Harris frowned, pacing the command deck. "Whatever they are, they're hostile. We're aborting. This planet isn't safe." But before they could leave, the ship's sensors blared. A massive energy spike surged from the ruins, locking onto the Aegis. The ship shuddered violently as systems flickered. "We're being pulled in," shouted the pilot. The Aegis plummeted, its descent uncontrollable. Elena clutched her seat as alarms screamed around her. Through the viewport, she saw the ground rushing up to meet them. The ship crashed with a thunderous impact, tearing through the alien terrain. Sparks flew and fires erupted. Elena scrambled to her feet, her ears ringing. "We need to move," Harris yelled, dragging a dazed crew member from the wreckage. The survivors gathered, their numbers painfully reduced. Outside, the landscape had shifted. The forest was no longer still. Massive trees swayed as if breathing, their branches curling toward the wreckage like fingers. "This planet is alive," Elena whispered, horror dawning on her. "And it wanted them dead." The silence after the crash was deafening, broken only by the crackle of burning wreckage and the labored breaths of the survivors. Commander Harris barked orders, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Secure the perimeter. Check for wounded. Dr. Travers, I need an assessment now." Elena stumbled out of the wreckage, clutching a cracked tablet. Around her, the alien forest loomed, its massive trees twisted and gnarled like the hands of a malevolent giant. The air felt thicker here, charged with a faint hum that seemed to press against her skull. "This is all wrong," she muttered to herself, pulling up readings. The planet's atmosphere was shifting, the oxygen levels spiking unpredictably. "It's adapting to us. This isn't a passive environment. It's reacting." "Reacting how?" Harris asked sharply, stepping beside her. His face was smeared with blood, a gash cutting across his temple. Before Elena could answer, a scream pierced the air. The group spun toward the sound, weapons raised. One of the soldiers, Ortiz, had strayed too close to the forest edge. A root as thick as a man's arm shot from the ground, wrapping around his leg and yanking him into the shadows. His screams echoed briefly before cutting off abruptly. "Open fire!" Harris roared. Bullets ripped into the trees, but the forest seemed to absorb the assault. The roots recoiled, retreating into the ground, but the damage was minimal. The air around them grew colder, the hum intensifying. "We need to move," Elena shouted. "Staying here is suicide." Harris nodded grimly. "Form up. We're heading for higher ground." The survivors trekked through the alien wilderness, every step feeling like a gamble. The forest was alive in ways they couldn't comprehend. Branches shifted above them as though watching, and the ground pulsed faintly underfoot. Ravi, walking close to Elena, whispered, "It's like the planet is breathing." "It's more than that," Elena said. "It's sentient." Harris overheard and scowled. "You're saying the planet itself is alive?" Elena hesitated, then nodded. "Not just alive, aware. It knows we're here, and it sees us as a threat." Their path led them to a series of jagged cliffs, offering a temporary reprieve from the forest's grasp. But the journey was far from safe. As they climbed, the sky darkened unnaturally fast, and a low, guttural roar echoed in the distance. "What now?" one of the soldiers muttered, his voice shaking. Elena glanced back. In the forest below, shadows churned like a black tide. The creatures from the ruins were moving, their grotesque forms twisting unnaturally as they scaled the terrain with terrifying speed. "They're hunting us," Harris said, his jaw tightening. "Keep moving," Elena urged. By nightfall, they reached the summit of the cliffs, setting up a makeshift camp. The group huddled together, the flickering light of their portable lamps barely pushing back the oppressive darkness. "Any ideas on how to get out of this mess?" Harris asked Elena, his tone sharp but not unkind. Elena stared at her tablet, running simulations and analyzing data. "The energy spike that brought us down came from those ruins," If we can find its source, maybe we can disable it. You want to go back to the place that almost got us killed? Ravi said, incredulous. Elena met his gaze, her eyes resolute. If we don't, we're trapped here. This planet won't let us leave otherwise. Harris sighed, rubbing his temples. We'll rest tonight. At first light, we move. But the planet had other plans. The attack came without warning. The shadows surged over the cliffs, the grotesque creatures moving with nightmarish speed. Their hollow eyes glowed faintly in the dark, and their bodies emitted a sickening, metallic screech with every movement. Defensive positions! Harris shouted, firing his rifle. The soldiers unleashed a storm of bullets, but the creatures barely faltered. One soldier was dragged screaming into the darkness, his cries cut short by a wet, crunching sound. Elena and Ravi crouched behind a boulder, desperately trying to think. There's too many! Ravi yelled over the chaos. Elena's eyes darted around, and she spotted something, a faint glow emanating from a fissure in the cliffside. There, she shouted, pointing. It's a cave. We can bottleneck them. Harris saw it too. Everyone, fall back. Into the cave. The survivors retreated, firing as they went. The cave entrance was narrow, and as the group squeezed inside, Harris and the remaining soldiers laid down suppressing fire, cutting down the creatures as they tried to follow. When the last soldier dove inside, Harris slammed an explosive charge onto the cave wall. Get down! The blast collapsed the entrance, sealing them in darkness. The cave was eerily silent, the air thick with tension. Elena activated a portable lamp, its weak light casting long shadows on the jagged walls. Sound off, Harris ordered. One by one, the survivors confirmed their presence. Out of the original team of 20, only 9 remained. This is a disaster, Ravi muttered, his voice trembling. It's worse than that, Elena said. This planet is adapting to us. Those creatures, the forest, they're all part of a single system. We're not just dealing with an ecosystem, we're dealing with a predator. Harris looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then we become the hunters. The group pushed deeper into the cave, their footsteps echoing ominously. The walls were lined with strange, pulsating veins of bioluminescent material, casting an unsettling glow. It's like the planet's nervous system, Elena whispered, fascinated and horrified. The tunnel opened into a massive chamber, its ceiling disappearing into darkness. In the center was a structure, a pulsating monolith covered in the same glyphs as the ruins. That's it, Elena said. The source of the energy spike. Before anyone could respond, the ground trembled. The walls of the chamber seemed to ripple, and from the shadows emerged something far worse than the creatures they had faced. A towering figure stepped forward, its body a grotesque amalgamation of organic and mechanical components. Its eyes burned with a malevolent intelligence, and its voice echoed in their minds without words, a thunderous chorus of hate and despair. Harris raised his rifle, his hands steady despite the terror in his eyes. What the hell is that? Elena's voice was barely a whisper. The planet's guardian, and it wasn't going to let them leave alive. The chamber vibrated with an oppressive hum, the air thick with an energy that made every breath feel like inhaling liquid fire. The guardian stepped closer, its grotesque form illuminated by the pulsating glyphs on the monolith. Each movement it made was deliberate, as if it were savoring the fear radiating from the group. Harris shouted, "Open fire!" The soldiers unleashed a hail of bullets, the sharp cracks of their rifles echoing through the cavern. The round struck the creature, sparks flying as metal and flesh collided, but it didn't flinch. Instead, the guardian raised one massive, clawed arm. A pulse of energy erupted from its body, a shock wave that sent everyone sprawling. Elena hit the ground hard, her ears ringing and her vision blurred. She scrambled behind a jagged rock for cover, her heart pounding. Ravi was beside her, clutching a deep gash on his arm, his face pale. "It's not going down," Ravi gasped, his voice a mix of panic and pain. Elena's eyes darted to the monolith. The glyphs glowed brighter with every attack on the guardian, as though feeding off the violence. "It's connected to the monolith," she shouted. "We're powering it." Harris, dazed but alive, crawled toward her. "What are you saying?" "We're fighting it the wrong way," Elena said, her mind racing. "The Guardian isn't just a creature, it's a part of the planet. If we destroy the monolith, we might sever its connection." Harris's jaw tightened. He turned to his remaining soldiers. "Cover her. Whatever it takes, keep that thing off her." Elena bolted toward the monolith, her tablet clutched tightly. The glyphs pulsed rhythmically, a pattern that seemed almost hypnotic. She stopped just short of touching it, scanning its surface with trembling hands. Behind her, the battle raged. The soldiers spread out, drawing the Guardian's attention. Its movements were terrifyingly precise, its massive claws slicing through the air with deadly accuracy. Another soldier fell, his scream cut short as the creature tore through him. Ravi crawled to Harris's side, firing bursts from his rifle. "We're running out of people." "Then we hold," Harris barked, his voice unwavering. The Guardian's attention shifted. It turned toward Elena, its hollow, burning eyes locking onto her. With a guttural roar, it charged. "Elena, move!" Harris yelled. She didn't flinch. Her fingers danced across the tablet, deciphering the glyph. They weren't just symbols. They were a language, a program. The monolith wasn't just a structure, it was a control node. "Almost there," Elena cried, sweat dripping down her face. The Guardian raised its arm, its claws glinting in the eerie light. Ravi hurled himself forward, firing his weapon until it clicked empty. The Guardian swatted him aside like a ragdoll, sending him crashing into a nearby rock. "No!" Elena screamed. The tablet beeped. The glyphs shifted, their pulsating light growing erratic. Elena slammed her palm onto the monolith, her voice trembling as she spoke. "If this planet is alive, then you can hear me. You don't want us here, and we don't want to be here. Let us go, and we'll leave you in peace." For a moment, everything stopped. The Guardian froze mid-step, its massive frame trembling. The hum in the air intensified, rising to an almost unbearable pitch. Then the glyphs exploded in light, a blinding burst that illuminated the entire cavern. The Guardian let out a deafening roar, its body convulsing as the connection between it and the monolith was severed. Elena was thrown backward, her head slamming against the ground. Darkness threatened to claim her, but she forced herself to stay conscious. When her vision cleared, she saw the Guardian collapsing, its once mighty form crumbling into a pile of metallic and organic debris. The glyphs on the monolith dimmed, their pulsating glow fading into darkness. The survivors regrouped, their numbers horrifyingly small. Ravi groaned as Harris helped him to his feet, his arm draped over the commander's shoulder. "You did it," Harris said, his voice rough but laced with relief. Elena shook her head, staring at the lifeless monolith. "This isn't over. That was just one piece of the system. The planet is still alive, and it knows we're here." The ground beneath them rumbled. The veins in the walls, once dormant, began to glow again, this time in a fiery red hue. "What now?" Ravi asked, fear etched into his face. Elena turned to the others, her expression grim. "We run." They fled the cavern, their path illuminated by the angry glow of the planet's veins. The rumbling intensified, and the ground cracked beneath their feet. The forest outside was no safer. The trees twisted and lashed out like living creatures, their branches seeking to ensnare them. "We need an extraction point," Harris shouted, scanning the terrain. Elena's tablet beeped, pulling up a map of their surroundings. "There's a clearing a mile west. If we can reach it, we might be able to signal the Aegis for backup." Harris grimaced. "The Aegis is gone, Travers." "Maybe not entirely," she said. "I think I can activate the emergency beacon. If we're lucky, it'll draw in whatever remains of the automated systems." "Lucky?" Ravi panted, narrowly avoiding a lashing branch. "We're running through a nightmare, and you're betting on luck?" "It's all we've got," Elena snapped. The clearing was in sight when the planet unleashed its final weapon. The ground split open, and from the fissure emerged a massive tendril, its surface glistening with an oily sheen. It lashed out with incredible speed, striking the group. 2 more soldiers were pulled into the abyss, their screams fading as the ground swallowed them whole. Elena activated the emergency beacon on her tablet, her fingers trembling. A piercing signal shot into the sky, a desperate cry for salvation. The tendril struck again, slamming into the ground just inches from her. Ravi shoved her aside, yelling, "Go! Just go!" "Ravi!" she screamed, reaching for him, but Harris grabbed her arm. "He made his choice," Harris shouted, dragging her toward the clearing. The beacon pulsed, its signal growing stronger. Above them, a faint light appeared, a descending drone from the Aegis's automated rescue system. But the planet wasn't done with them yet. The tendril reared back, preparing to strike again. "Run!" Harris roared. They sprinted for the drone as it landed, its hatch sliding open. The tendril came crashing down, splitting the ground behind them. With a final desperate leap, they dove into the drone, and the hatch sealed shut. The drone ascended, the clearing and the planet's wrath disappearing below them. Elena collapsed against the wall, tears streaming down her face. Ravi was gone, the crew decimated, and the planet still pulsed with an ominous life. Harris sat across from her, silent and grim. After a long moment, he said, "This isn't over. That thing will come for us." Elena nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "It's not just a planet. It's a warning." Above them, the stars waited, cold and indifferent. But none of them could shake the feeling that something from Terra Omega was watching, and it wouldn't rest until humanity paid for its trespass. The drone's ascent was eerily smooth, but the tension inside was anything but. The survivors sat in grim silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Elena's tablet blinked faintly, running diagnostics on the emergency beacon. The screen showed nothing but static interference. "This thing won't hold," she muttered, clutching the device. Harris leaned back against the drone's metallic wall, his face lined with exhaustion. "It only needs to hold until we're in orbit." Elena didn't respond. She stared out the small viewport, watching as the writhing, angry surface of Terra Omega grew smaller. The tendrils that had pursued them were retreating, sinking back into the fractured ground, but the planet's ominous glow pulsed like a heartbeat. "This isn't retreat," she whispered. "It's waiting." As the drone reached the upper atmosphere, alarms blared. The automated voice of the drone's control system crackled through the speakers. "Warning! External anomaly detected." Harris snapped upright. "What now?" Elena's tablet began flashing with chaotic data streams. She quickly deciphered the readings, her face paling. "It's not just the planet, it's the entire system. There's a gravitational distortion pulling us back." Ravi's absence felt like a fresh wound as Elena realized the grim truth. "The planet doesn't want us to leave," she said. The drone shuddered violently as its engines strained against an invisible force. The viewport flickered with a strange, shimmering light, an ethereal barrier forming between them and the void of space. "Brace yourselves," Harris shouted. The drone bucked and rolled, its stabilizers failing to compensate. Elena held onto the console, frantically scanning for a solution. Her fingers hovered over the emergency override. "Commander, if I overload the thrusters, we might punch through." Harris grimaced. "Might? It's either that or we crash back into the planet." "Do it." Elena activated the override. The drone roared as its thrusters pushed beyond their limits, flooding the cabin with a deafening roar. The shimmering barrier outside cracked like glass, sending shockwaves rippling through the atmosphere. For a moment, the drone hung motionless, suspended between freedom and doom. Then, with a deafening crack, they broke through. The silence of space enveloped them like a shroud. The alarms stopped and the drone's system stabilized. The survivors slumped in their seats, too exhausted to celebrate. Elena's eyes remained fixed on her tablet. "We're clear," she said softly. Harris exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing for the first time since they'd landed. "Let's get back to the fleet." But the reprieve was short-lived. A warning light blinked on the console. Unidentified signal detected. Elena frowned and tapped her screen. The signal was faint but persistent, emanating from Terra Omega. She enhanced the feed, and her stomach twisted. The signal wasn't random. It was a message. What does it say? Harris asked, his voice low. Elena's lips trembled as she translated the glyph. It's a warning. For us, for anyone. The message was simple but chilling. We are what awaits you if you keep going. Leave this path, or you will become us. The drone finally docked with what remained of the Aegis's orbital systems, a skeletal frame, scarred from the energy wave that had brought them down. Automated tethers secured the drone, and the survivors disembarked, their boots echoing in the hollow corridors of the battered station. The few surviving crew members of the Aegis looked up as Harris and his team entered. Their faces were a mix of relief and horror. "What happened down there?" one of them asked. Elena spoke before Harris could. "We weren't supposed to find it. The planet, the system, it's not just alien. It's a warning left behind by something older. Something more advanced?" "Warning about what?" Elena met their eyes, her voice steady despite the fear roiling within her. "About what happens when life takes the wrong path. It wasn't just evolution gone wrong, it was a punishment, a containment." As the survivors gathered in the station's command center, the ominous glow of Terra Omega filled the viewport. The planet seemed to pulse faintly, as if aware of their presence. Elena's hands moved across the console, pulling up data from the drone's scanners. The energy signature from the monolith was spreading, rippling across the planet's surface like a virus. "It's waking up," she said. "What do you mean waking up?" Harris asked, stepping closer. Elena turned to face him. "The monolith was just one node. When we disrupted it, we triggered a chain reaction. Whatever's down there, it's not just alive. It's trying to break free." The room fell silent. Harris clenched his fist. "We need to destroy it." Elena shook her head. "If we attack, we'll only feed it. This isn't something we can fight, Commander. It's a force of nature, a reminder of how far evolution can twist when left unchecked." The station's systems flickered as another signal came through. This time, it wasn't from Terra Omega. It was from deep space. Elena's blood ran cold as she deciphered the transmission. The glyphs were similar to those on the planet, but older, more refined. The message was clear. You were warned. You will be judged. Suddenly, the viewport darkened as something massive eclipsed the light of the distant sun. A colossal structure drifted into view, its surface a patchwork of alien architecture and glowing runes. "It's not just the planet," Elena whispered. "Whatever left that warning, it's here." The station's alarms blared as the structure unleashed a beam of energy, scanning the Aegis. Harris grabbed Elena's arm, his voice urgent. "What do we do?" Elena stared at the glowing alien vessel, her mind racing. They were no longer just explorers. They were witnesses to a cosmic judgment. "We send the warning," she said finally. "To Earth, to the colonies. Everyone needs to know what's out here." "And then?" Harris asked. Elena met his gaze, her expression resolute. "And then we hope they listen." As the alien structure loomed closer, the survivors prepared for whatever came next. The stars outside seemed colder, harsher, a stark reminder that humanity was not alone, and that some paths were never meant to be walked.